Right. So back to the cluster of terms. Agency. Can I ask again what people think the word agency means? Not in a kind of normative. I watched Mission Impossible the other day. That's a lot of agency right there. Did you know that the group that Tom Cruise, like this is 5 movies in, I didn't even realize, the group that Tom Cruise is in is called the IMF?
Yeah.
It was cool. Like the special forces that he's part of, that even the CIA doesn't want to talk about because it's so special. It's called the IMF. And in this movie, I don't want to spoil it for you, but he's going around fighting a group of ex-spies who are so tired of the system, like us. But they're all white people though.
They are. They're good white people. They're good white people.
Yeah, they're the ones who've been used and abused as spies by the system. So now they create the secret network called the Syndicate who fight the system. And in the movie, they never say, they make, it's really bad, the movie. It's really crap. If you want to see Tom Cruise jump on a plane, that's yay. But it's really bad. So the IMF is fighting the Syndicate who is fighting the system. And it's all just kind of... But yeah, agency, what do you think agency is? And mainly what it is for you? What do you think, understand by this term?
Can I just say something about, because resistance has come up a couple of times, and I've been thinking a lot about resistance recently, and sometimes I find it quite weird how it gets used, because when we talk about resistance, what we usually refer to are people who resist power, and they resist dominant discourses and the effects of dominant discourses on their lives. But actually, I sometimes think it's the other way around. Like there's resistance from what we call the system, for instance, resistance towards our constant attempts to overcome these conditions. You know, and that kind of gets me into agency. I feel like agency is actually always rooted, like we always have agency, and with that agency we always try and overcome these conditions of a resistant system.
Say it again, say that again.
Like we always have agency. Agency is always rooted within us, and with that agency we try and overcome the resistance of greater power and discourse.
Overcome the resistance of the power structure. So you're thinking
exactly.
about the power structure. The system is the one that's resisting.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's kind of idea that people are autonomous and they're able to have movement and to be able to do something. So I think Hobbes even has this thing about like even like a rolling stone or something has like some sort of method of and then you've got sort of like all these. It's very much rooted, I think, like from my like studies, like from like liberalism, this kind of idea that is, to be a person is like to do this to be able to do as you wish when you wish, and it's kind of this independence and very much like with agency and individual is kind of this concept. But like, agency.
What is it for you?
For me, I know. Like from my own cosmology, the idea that like I was created and that the world like there's the idea of free will, but the world, like everything is written, so there's the idea of predestination. And then when in your life, like when you have a family, like a mom and dad, then the idea of you just being able to do what you want, when you want, how you want, is like that doesn't happen. And then being poor, it's like no. You can't do agency to do what? Like when you have nothing in your pocket, what can you do? So like, and then being a woman, so like there are so many spaces that I could never go into. That's even before me thinking like religiously, like should I go into those spaces? Like they don't want me, even if and I can't enter them anyway. So I mean, there's this whole word about agency and like do what you like, but living, it's never been something I could look at.
I think when I hear the word agency, I automatically think agent of your own destiny. Like you can empower yourself to make like surpass.
Trying to sense, are you saying this is a bad thing or a good thing?
Yeah, I'm not here for agency. I feel like.
Whoa.
As a term or as a word, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. Because I also feel like it's linked to what we were talking about before anyway. Like, I think agency is an idea which is basically used to kind of like police us and demotivate us from positivity. That's why like I was kind of resistant to reading the word alienation, because I felt like demotivation was in a better phrase. Because I felt like I think alienation is just at a group level. Does that make sense? I feel like there's certain people who will be forever considered alien, right? So we're alienated at like certain levels of society. But then when it comes to like this feeling of us being locked in our bodies, of us like being able to like experience this racism and to feel it and to kind of like viscerally deal with it, right? To viscerally feel not being like viscerally like cutting off our ties with our friends because they wouldn't be able to like handle discussions on race. Basically, it's like this demotivation mechanism, which basically kind of uses this idea of agency to kind of police us from recognizing that the self isn't something that it kind of like, I don't know, I think it's like the carrot on the stick, which basically makes us think that, you know, like we have to kind of like empower the self, this little cornered pushback, what you call it, person to kind of like surpass it. Because that's what like whenever I do these kind of talk, you always see like the person who also having the most agency or having the most kind of pushback or whatever is the person who can articulate themselves very well, who can push back against the system very well. You know, things like that. So it becomes this like very lonely, very secluded, very like alienated, right? Like, so, but then it exists at a group level at the same time. And I also feel like it kind of like blocks. It makes us like confused. So that's what like when I don't know who was it, but it said something about how like Black Lives Matter basically focuses doesn't focus too much on experience. I feel like that's an issue because I feel like we kind of read. I think just generally we read, and we tend to kind of like read everything that Black people do, or just generally as being just kind of like trying to regulate it to being of experience, right? So we experience racism, but and just lock you to that moment, right? So you've experienced racism and that's it, but there is no like pushing forward to kind of make it into an idea against it. Does that make sense?
That's the other end of what you were saying. So there's a part of racism that reduces, say, Africans to the body that experiences hollow over here, but everything over here. Whereas, so Lewis Gordon, philosopher, uses he puts it like theory resides in the north, and experience resides in the south. So Black people don't have the theoretical tools to think about the experience. So therefore, you have white people doing the theorizing for everybody. So that's the opposite end. I think there needs to be like a meeting point where there's a healthy balance, basically.
But I just feel like stressing the idea of experience basically also this kind of like what do you call it? Putting experience on a pedestal also kind of leads to this politics in which we basically have to follow and respect the experience.
Like the one experience.
No, just the experience, which basically is subjective, right? So like the person, so the mechanism in which you kind of recognize the most like the correct experience is up to you. So like what you decide to kind of like see remnants of an ideology in whatever experience is up to you, right? So I feel like again that is a kind of dodgy way of dealing with this.
Very quickly.
I wanted to mention something about specifically what you were talking about, the word agency and how in loads of political discourses the goal then becomes to have agency, to have your own agency, right? That's always when you're talking about how to, you know, so-called have the tools to pull back or how to defend yourself, and it always comes back to having your own agency within political discourse.
Okay, yeah, a lot of this has to do with the. Sorry. By the way, you guys either have the best seat or
Yeah,
not.
I said that.
You have a good seat?
Yeah.
You like it? Okay. You haven't spoken yet, so I'm going to allow you. You want to say something?
Oh, no, the time is past. I mean, I was just going to say that for me, agency is kind of finding that source of power that's actually beyond being victimized. And the power doesn't necessarily have to be handed to you by white supremacy, by theorizing it, but it's actually the self-realization of that power that already exists.
So agency is it the thing that awaits you after you realize it, or is it the thing you need to get there?
Can you repeat that again?
So the way you said it, the power that you actually it's already there. You just need to realize that, or to realize the power.
Yes.
Is that the moment in which you grasp agency, or is agency the thing you need to get to that point? Or think about it.
Yeah.
What I say is, if white people have agency, why do black people have it? We can't all have the same thing. And it's I like the demotivation, the thinking of new words, because alienation is a Eurocentric term. It's a Marxist term. Only Marx could have come. Only a working class experience or narrative could have come up with that idea. This is why Wilderson is very working hard to say to black people, yes, you are workers and you are exploited by capital, but I wouldn't say you are alienated, because what slavery is totally different than what working under the conditions is, right? So he would borrow from a black feminist like Saidiya Hartman the terms fungibility and accumulation. You are both accumulatable and fungible. That's what you suffer. And alienation.
What's that mean?
Accumulation. Fungibility is expendability, disposability. The idea that you're not even a subject. I'm trying to get to that word. That you're just an object.
I'm sorry. So, your point is that I think I just.
It's the language thing, basically. I want to continue, but suffice it to say, we are speaking in English. And agency is an English word. If I'm going to make this about me again, when I come to this country and I learn these words, for me, I struggle to find the word for agency in my language, right? And alienation in my language. I do find the words for colonialism, and mind you, it has no relationship to the actual word colonialism. Eritreans think the word they use doesn't really match up with what colonialism is. So there's a linguistic barrier already within which we are thinking what these things are.
So you think it's romantic, or like the term alienation is too romantic in a way?
It is not
like a romanticization of the.
It is not. No, it is not. No, it is not correct.
It's not accurate.
It's not accurate.
Yeah, because we're talking about accurate language.
It's about being particular with our language when we describe things. That's why I started with, yes, black people are working, but black people became black under conditions of enslavement, not working. So this is really easy. When a white person tells you this, a white leftist tells you this, you say to them this. You talk about a working class as the person who has a relationship to the modes of production rather than owning the modes of production, right? Or which we can call the modes of production, we can call them property, machinery. I am the machinery. I don't have a relationship to the property, to the mode of production. I am the mode of production. Okay? So I was the property that was already profitable before I even worked or didn't work. That doesn't matter. I could keep you in my bedroom if you're a woman. I could keep you in the field if you're a man. I can sell you without ever even using you. This creates a barrier. White people leave, they get angry, say, "Oh, you guys are breaking up our union." Agency. So yeah, what I was saying is basically true. I mean, I don't know about Hobbes, but I'm going to speak about agency the way the word comes up in political language here in Europe through the liberal humanism school of that guy on the left, John Stuart Mill, or James Stuart Mill, father and son, and John Locke. And then we're going to go to Marxism, which has beef with liberal humanism. It's Karl Marx. And we go to safe feminism, white feminism, Michelle Barrett, and Stuart Hall, who's kind of post-colonial, cosmopolitan figure here from England, Britain. Agency and liberal humanism. So what does liberal humanism think about agency? It defines it. It's like what you said. The idea of agency and liberal humanism are inextricable. They actually come up. Agency comes up in the discourse of liberal humanism. And the term and liberal humanism, I'm not going to explain it, but Huda kind of hit it on the spot, the idea of the self-determined actor in the world is kind of centralized, right, in terms of importance. So they call it a term referring to the role of the human actor as individual or group in directing or effectively intervening in the course of history. Liberal humanism sees the individual or subject as unified and self-determining, as opposed to multifaceted, fragmented, things of that nature. It therefore ascribes agency to the subject as a more or less unrestricted actor, something you already have. Somebody, was it you who said it? Do you see this? Do you agree with this? Or you were explaining agency earlier, I don't know, maybe somebody else. It therefore ascribes agency to the subject as a more or less unrestricted actor in shaping her or his own life and a more general social destiny. Or anyways, any of these points.
Sorry, I can't speak.
So so liberal humanism is a school that gives you agency, and then therefore hence defined it as such. And we could look at the dictionary and agree with it, or at least the liberal humanist dictionary agree with it, but then we'd have to think about how do we relate to that. Do non-European people think about the subject as self-determined, or that like you were saying, that there's already in your cosmology a story into which you are written into. You are not a controller of the self. In Native American, in indigenous scholarship, Jose, you know the concept of unicity is prior to the split between self and land and natural resource. The idea, for example, Europeans can only think of this as natural resource, whereas in indigenous cosmologies, this is source. It's not life. It's not natural resource. It's not a resource to be used, molded according to a particular actor of history. Right? For them, it's source of life. Right?
And also to say as well, liberal humanism makes its story like it's an eternal story. This is how people always were. But even within, Western European history, this wasn't how they always saw themselves. Like this is very much like it was created at a point, and so you have this idea of liberalism also coming with this sort of different understanding of Christianity and what the state was.
But secularization. So you take the agency from the writer of history, the one and only God, onto and it's on the institution on earth, the credential is the church, to the nation state, and the citizen becomes the enforcer of what before was the God. So when people talk about Britain as being a secular society, it really is I don't know how to put it in language, but it's a secular society that actually mimics the Christian-centric society that preceded it. It's just that God is now man, capital M, European man, and church, what used to be church, the absolute arbiter of truth and things like that, is not a state. And within that, people like Locke would say the agent, the individual is the property individual. But Locke wasn't even enough to just talk about agency. That way you have to have property, you have to have a relationship to ownership and things like that. And Marxism has a problem with this idea of the individual who writes himself into history, marching forward. So Marxism would say, and other theories recognize the influence of social and economic determinations beyond the individual, and offer a more qualified and complex view of agency. So the complicating matters. Karl Marx famously said, men make their own history, but do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves. So there's a difference between choice and options. For Marx, the working class was denied agency. So he's saying agency is there, but we don't have it. The working class, and he said the working class, denied agency and would only assume, by the way, I would say, he wouldn't say we because he was middle class. Right? He was pretty rich, he just got poor because he's thinking too much. For Marx, the working class was denied agency and would only assume its role as actor in the world through the revolutionary transformation of economic and social relations inspired by class consciousness. is again this mystification, the demystification moment where things are, once you get particular working class consciousness, then you can truly be said to have agency. And for him, it's a bit more of a collective moment. Agency. Agency and feminism. We're going to go to Michelle Barrett to write these names down, or we might put them up on the slide on their website. She has a problem with Foucault. For Foucault, power is omnipresent, right? And though exercised with aims and objectives, has no presiding headquarters. So there's this empty throne. No specific source in the decisions or of groups or individuals. Anthony Giddens, famous sociologist, commented, Foucault's history tends to have no active subjects at all. It is history with the agency removed. It's kind of like water that's flowing in different movements. It's always going to be water, but you can't really particular. There's no stream, there's no north or south or east or west. So this obviously has serious implications. This is my bit. For people who have had their capacity for being actional violently removed due to colonialism, and who struggles against, I use action, I wouldn't say agency, violently removed to colonialism, and who struggles against colonialism, or in effect struggles to regain the agency as subjects of history. I might be contradicting myself. So I'm using the Marxist paradigm, but actually instead of capitalism, I'm putting colonialism in. Right? So Michelle Barrett criticizes Foucault's position from a feminist perspective, citing the naming of the category woman or the category man is essential for crafting counter-standards. So if Foucault moves away any kind of idea of individual agency, that means you can't point to the person, to the subject who's doing the oppression. Right? So naming is important for feminism, because if I can't locate power in, for what I wouldn't say for her, but for not psychoanalytic feminists, in kind of the phallic symbol, right, in the man. If you can't do that, then what you're effectively doing is politically silencing women, feminists. You're silencing the very. Think of how in France you can't, or in Sweden is it as well? The word race has been removed from legal discourse, so you can't actually claim victimhood or any kind of case based on race. Because race doesn't exist, it's a social construct, right? So the French government believes that it is a social construct, right? And that was the problem all along. We actually believed these people had something essentially racial about them and different about them. So let's get rid of that whole idea. Therefore, any some people call this racial neoliberalism. Any kind of idea of any moment where you are racially abused, let's say at the workplace, you can't claim that. You have to think of something else. Race would be dismissed out the door. Can't even think of it. So she's kind of doing something similar. You're taking away the language, the very language, the very pointing capacity to actually speak about it. To deconstruct existing, she continues to deconstruct existing relations of power for her men and women, threatens to deconstruct the concept of agency itself, and thus to undermine any counter strategy. That's self-explanatory? Mm-hmm. Yeah? So, what does it mean by deconstruct? So I just keep this moving. If everything is social, if race, say, is a social construction, right? Then what we need to do is deconstruct it. Right? We've made it seem like this, but it actually isn't. So let's pick at it and see what it is, or back into the nothing that was all along. Right? When you do that, you actually do not tend to the thing that it's actually built with it. Say sexism in this case, or patriarchy. So you take away with it the baby with the bathwater, that kind of idea. Throw out the baby with the bathwater. Then you have Stuart Hall, who had a qualified idea of agency. He offers a non-essentialist theory of agency. So his idea of essentialism, he still thinks it's a social construct. But he would rather, he wouldn't go all the way with Foucault. He would say there is still something we can call agency to work with. He proposes a fragmented, decentered human agent as opposed to liberal humanist, unified one. Thanks for coming. An agent who is both subjected by power and capable of acting against this power. He's giving you a balanced point of view, basically. It's not just constantly pressing upon you, you are also pressing upon it. There's Lawrence Grossberg, a cultural studies theorist. So he's speaking about Hall. He said there's a position of theoretical anti-humanism, by which anti-humanism is the school that Foucault's related with, because he believes that the world is so decentered that you cannot speak of any individual agents. That a humanism makes no sense to you. Every time you put a human in here and use him as a kind of a normative figure to go ahead, you're capitulating yourself to one point of one normative idea of what it means to be human. So he calls out all humanists, and he professes a kind of anti-humanism. So Stuart Hall would theoretically agree with him, but politically he disagrees. We do need a humanism, something that binds us together, around which we can common discrepancies that we can move around on the system. For without an articulated subject, which is Hall, capable of acting, no resistance is possible. So that's Stuart Hall.
Oh.
So this is Lawrence Grossberg writing about Hall, but this is Hall's entire theory. This is his work. He says we can't. Before he died, this is all he kept repeating. Like everybody keeps saying, "Don't essentialize, don't essentialize," and they're talking about in the text, right? Don't essentialize in the text. Don't essentialize in music videos. He actually said this. Out in the streets, the essentialism is roaring away. They keep killing us. They're still mugging us. He was the first one to write about policing this country in an expansive manner in the 70s. So that's the qualified agency. So that's agency. What time? Cool. Is it okay we leave at 10? Yeah. We'll go have some discussion afterwards. I'm going to have to rush through the other two. So subjectivity and identity. I said earlier that sometimes when I read stuff online, these words are used interchangeably. Right? I'm going to try to give them a short definition again. Today is about key terms. Subjectivity refers to the ways in which we are situated in relation to power and how we as individuals are subjected to or by an external regime of violence, such as the law, state, history, capital, and so on. So when you change the word subjective to a different form, subjection, being subjected to or by being subjected by. Saidiya Hartman has a book called Scenes of Subjection. For her, slavery, the main scene of subjection was not at the whipping post. It was everywhere. It was on the minstrel stage. People were being hailed as slaves or as lesser at the auction house, or what do you call it, where they're being bought. So that was a scene of subjection. So the slave was the image we have in our head. The slave who was undergoing spectacular violence at the whipping post or plantation and things like that. For her, that's a problem because we focus on spectacle, whereas the everydayness of subjection that surrounds slave life, around the whole, not just on the slave estate and the plantation, but even if they went across to another town with their master, there was this whole relationship between them and white men who did not own them, white men who did not own slaves. There was already she was talking about how we need a different language to speak about that, because if it's just about the master with the whip, then it's the master's fight essentially with the slave, right? Whereas the slave, if we could think about them being subjected by the entire political regime, then we can speak about their subjectivity in a more expansive way. Identity is the result of the individual process, which nonetheless works itself out within a collective, because there's no vacuum within which individuals live, by which we continuously construct or reconstruct our sense of self with a perceived zone of autonomy, but always in relation to those outside regimes mentioned above. go back to feminism, sex is thought through the idea of subjection. Gender is thought through the category of identity. Any questions? This is a bit. You have questions, or is it? I'm trying to really go. Finally, what do you call it? Separate things so that we don't conflate them. So, for example, when a person who's oppressed nonetheless goes around and refashions themselves using whatever tools available to them, they are working on their identity. They are not working on their subjectivity because they are already subjected by something much greater. This means that that person who's going around fashioning themselves might not be aware of their subjection. And therefore, we have identity politics. Does that make sense? Everything is reduced down to identity when actually beneath it there's subjection. Sorry. Let that sink in. Yeah.
I was just going to say, because I was reading a slave narrative, and like you said earlier about thinking about the master of whipping and all that stuff as being the main thing. But really, when a slave is freed, then they then become something else. So they're still subjected to the non-human identity as well, because after their freedom comes, a white person will still look at them and say, are you freed? And then they have to show their papers. So then they're restricted to being human if they have their papers that they can show as proof. And it's still the same if you look at immigration and today's technical work.
If you actually look at you said this last time, Monday, right? About the paper thing?
Yeah.
I wanted to say then, the very invention of passports came up with slavery.
Yeah.
Because white people could travel seas all they wanted, but they needed papers for their cargo.
Yeah.
So passports is not a European invention. It's not something that's common sense. It actually came about because a huge group of people were being transported and people needed documentation. But that is what you end up having. And then once you're there, you need movement papers when you move them, so on and so forth. And so the reason 12 Years a Slave, what's the name? Solomon Northup was the reason they took it away from him is because they gave it to him in the first place.
Yeah. And without it, he's nothing anyway. So I just wanted to say that even when you get to that moment of clarity and you reshape yourself or reconstruct yourself, if you're not aware that you are subjected to other agents outside of yourself, it's still kind of like, what have you achieved in a way?
Yeah, so this is the fine line where this is where all the beef begins, internally to people. And the beef happens because we don't have, like Wilderson catches a lot of heat because he uses direct language. All black people are slaves. That's what he says. Not because he believes they are made for slavery, because he said the essential way the world looks at us is because of 500 years of modernity and even before that, proto-slavery. But he has a deep, profound love for black people, what they do culturally. He's written, I don't know what you call it. He hasn't written plays, but he's directed plays, like famous black plays on stage and things like that. But when you put him on the mic, he does not talk about that. He doesn't want to fool people into the sense of that identity actually gives you a form of agency. His entire second book is he says it himself, my entire second book is a categorical critique of agency as a category, as the way we think about it. So what you said earlier is perfect. The carceral continuum continues. Slavery, the slave plantation, the prison industrial complex, and Jim Crow and policing, they're part of the same continuum because the subjection never changes. Identities change. Black people become Marxists, black people become voters, black people become consumers, entertainers, black people become consumers, black people become nationals, UK people, Caribbean
presidents.
Listen, Caribbean people here are descent. Say again? Sorry. Caribbean people, I love them, but I have a problem when they come here and say they're Jamaicans, Barbadians, or West Indians, or whatever. I think that the best, although these things help, I'm not shitting on it. I'm doing the same thing Wilson is doing. These things give you the sense of identity is important. Right? It gets you through the day. But when you do political work, you need to go back to subjection. Say I am. That's why it's important to say I am black. Or that's why it's important to say I'm not a post-colonial immigrant suffering immigration problems here. I'm a descendant of slaves. Period. Like if you struggle to make the connection, come here and we can talk about it. Zakiya Jackson is a black queer feminist.
So can you explain? I didn't understand what you meant about certain Caribbean individuals basically identifying with the region and where they come from.
No, that's not what I mean.
Yeah, can you explain that?
This comes up in my frustration with the idea of context between black people in the UK and black people in the US.
Right.
There's all this friction, not due to black people themselves, or this discrepancy, because what is laid out for us is don't conflate our situation here with those in America, because America is different. This is what is laid out for us. But we have to debate how our relationship, our conditions are actually very, very similar.
If not worse, actually, statistically.
I know somebody, when Mustafa's not around here, he said he thinks this place is worse because it's so much more covert. But anyway, that's his point of view. But it's part of the. I don't want to lose the point. I'm going to get to the point actually. I'm going to get to it on the next slide. Speak about it. Sorry, I'll get to it. Zakiya Jackson speaks about the difference between identification and identity. So the identification for her, the process identity, is this reified thing that we can carry with us, as we mold as we go. We come to understand who we are through a cumulative process whereby we take on and then shed, it's fluid images of ourselves through our interactions with an intersubjective world that is subjectively experienced. Identity suggests the cumulative image that we develop of ourselves out of this process. While the self may appear natural, autonomous, and long-lasting, right, the rules of liberal humanism, that we think we're just like you. It is ephemeral, which is rather not in the opposite of long-lasting, and unconsciously intersubjective. Identification is the process of shedding and acquiring images that define our identity. We don't have much time. If this is a bit complicated, we can get to it in the next session. I just put this on like literally half an hour before I got started. I just love her. But that's why I wanted to put it in there. That's just that kind of additional thing. So, anybody know what interpellation means?
Isn't it how you come to
big word, yeah. Go ahead.
Isn't it how you come to be yourself, how you come to explain yourself?
Sorry. Yeah, kind of. The interpellated subject is. Let's go for it. You know this image, right?
Yeah.
We've seen it everywhere. Interpellation is, like you said, the way in which you become a subject. At the moment or the process by which you become a subject. The example people give is a policeman says, "Hey you," and you're not, and he's behind you. Right? So you're being hailed. In that very moment, the relationship between policeman and policed emerges. And if you're a black person, this is usually used within the context of urban policing of black youth. The black youth comes to know his relationship to authority. That's what he becomes interpellated as a subject. And for Saidiya Hartman earlier said, for her the entire slave state is one giant interpellation regime upon the black body, by which the black body knows itself as what it is. To go back to identity, in post-1968, in the 70s and the 80s, the middle class academia, intelligentsia, they focused hard on slave narratives and how slaves saw themselves in spite of hardship. We got identity politics coming for the last 30 years. That is important how slaves saw themselves, how they wrote themselves, how they thought. There's work within Black feminism, and there's many passages to it, but there's work in Black feminism that, for example, look at slave women who aborted their kids, their babies, because they did not want them to live the life that they lived.
But Toni Morrison, she's
Love it.
got the play
Toni
on
Morrison,
parts,
yeah. But
She killed the child, wasn't it?
yeah, exactly.
Rather than go back to slavery.
There, Black feminists would call that agency. This is a way in which Black women, Black female slaves, performed agency. I want to cry. No, they didn't have to do that. It's not that they didn't have to do it. When you focus on that moment, right? What we do is we, I guess now we can romanticize it and we heroize these women rather than look at the system that is still the same. That's forced them to do it in the first place. There's a movie. What was that movie we watched where the thing about the 1492 film? Do you remember?
Even the Rain.
The guys who make the film in
Even the Rain.
Even the Rain. So there's a scene in the film. This is a group of Spanish filmmakers.
Oh, they wanted to smash the baby in the
Yeah.
drown the baby.
So they brought a history book. So they're making a film about 1492 in Columbus arriving, right? And they're on location. And they read in the book, it says, Native women drowned their babies in the river so as to keep them from the genocide. So they're about to shoot the scene. And the native people that they enlisted as actors for the film refused.
Well, what?
They refused. They will not do this scene.
So it's a film within a film.
So the film within the film. So they're not going to really put them in there. They're just going to have the scene in it. So the director couldn't understand it. But it's real history. It's your history. You need to put it in there. And maybe because unconsciously they are thinking through identity, and the idea that self-fashioning, the process of fashioning yourself is kind of never ending. Right? You should never just let identity go with the flow. Now, I think that is informing that director's idea of why he insists we should have this in the film. This has a human interest story kind of thing. Whereas they understood that, because in the film they make the point that these actors themselves are still living under imperialist multinational corporation arm of coloniality.
On the other hand, you've got the Barbican, right? The show at the Barbican where, a bunch of Black performers were put in cages, right? And they decided to do that, and then the person who directed this performance was like, well, they chose to do it. I mean, they agreed to do that, right? I mean, it's all fine, guys, and anyway, there no longer is slavery.
You can agree and disagree with it. At the end of the day, you're thinking through performance of a particular identity, with an identity thing. What the people who are mad at the show were talking about is the continued, consistent, constant sameness of then and now. We're still caged.
Yeah.
And you're making a performative gesture, which is supposed to what? So we know this more. I know this interpolating pointer. The term is to describe the process by which a human subject is hailed or addressed and thus positioned in relation to power. When a policeman calls out, "Hey, you there," one individual, 9 times out of 10, it's the right one, turns around, believing, suspecting, knowing that it is for him. And turning around, recognizing the call is for himself, the individual becomes in that moment the subject, positioned or repositioned in relation to the general ideological codes of law and criminality. Now, I believe this is true for everybody, but we're not interpolated the same. Right? I think white people are interpolated. I don't know when white people become, at the moment of white interpolation. You tell us? You don't have to. And this is my favorite quote of them all, Frank B. Wilson. Third, the power to pose the question is the greatest power. So, if it's kind of vague why I am agreeing, it seems like I'm agreeing in some of the ways people within Europe have thought about power, it's because I know I have so much more in the back. People I will listen, I'm saying, that applies, that's why I keep saying it throughout the whole session, that applies to you people. And you are right, that applies to you people. But it works on us differently. And with Foucault, I'm going to do it in the next session, why Foucault, people have done this already, within academia, within those texts that use language so that we don't read them, or we're demotivated from reading them. How Foucault has been decolonized in the way he thinks about things, and how Gramsci has been pretty much put on his deathbed by tranquility to blackness. So interpellation, it matters to, and this is not just Caribbeans actually, this is about the whole black diaspora, post-colonial immigrant subject. If you're interpellated as a post-colonial immigrant, and you then start to see yourself as a post-colonial immigrant who has certain grievances, right? And let's compare. What would an immigrant complain about that would be exactly the same as what a slave would complain about?
You can't bring your family with you to the country.
Okay, let me stop you there. The family is annihilated at the port of Amina, right in Ghana. You are natively alienated from the point to go. And once you arrive, you are sold into 4 different directions. And this idea of natal alienation is used within slavery studies in terms of black people, Africans who became enslaved, were ripped both ascending and descending order of their natal kinship structure. You, and this is Sadiya Harman's second book, it's called Lose Your Mother. Not lose your motherland, but lose your mother. For a reason. She's talking about this idea where, so let's bring it back. The immigrant wants to bring their family over. The immigrant has a psychological, what's the word? A kind of base understanding of homeland, even if they've been ripped apart from it. They have it here. And actually it's the very thing that keeps them going here every day, right? I mean, I've talked to, within the place I work, they're all immigrants. And every other conversation is, when are you going home? When is the next time you're going home? Oh, I just came back from home. The slave doesn't have that. And for me, my problem with the African diaspora is when they see themselves as Somali, Nigerian, Caribbean, or whatever it does for them, it actually further alienates a particular group of people who do not have that luxury to call themselves a country. Now you could say within a post-colonial environment, a nation building, it's very much useful. But I don't know if the nationalist, post-colonial nationalist project, formerly colonized people, has been successful. That's what I would say. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Just run the last bit again now because my phone is distracting me.
The national independence movement was necessary, but it has, there's a term. Speak among yourself, I'm going to find something.
If you think about, for example, West Indies, so Jamaica got independence in 63 or 68? I forget.
62.
So you have, as a nation state that is now an individual nation state. It has its responsibility to its own economy, its own peoples. It can issue its own passports. And people can go everywhere it wants. Except it can't. Its relationship, for example, what Jamaica is able to produce, exactly the same as it was, the 2 years before independence, and it is afterwards. And then actually it gets inaugurated into the nation states. And it said, you're an independent country, you can take out loans as well for modernization because, you're a rural economy, you need to modernize. So it takes on these IMF loans, and those World Bank loans, and it's told to sort of be, now you're a state, you can do what other states do. You're a state, so you can now stop other people from coming into your waters. So you really have no control of your waters. You'll have like a US as your huge neighbor that is to control. Yes, in the Commonwealth, your education system is still ostensibly the same education system, and and so what nation states now have to, in order to be on the international stage, you're still accepting all the modes that were exactly the same as colonialism. Except now you are indebted instead of anything else. So, in fact, you're in a worse, well, I say Jamaica, I say this about every post-colonial state.
I say Caribbean because it's the first thing that comes to my mind, because I hurt when I see the debate that is they're struggling to reconcile the similarities over and above challenges that saying, no, you are a British citizen, no, you don't have history of slavery, and you are a Windrush generation, arrivant. You are these kind of conceptual analytical obstacles are put forward, and you are trying to build a Pan-African or a global Black or these movements based on a collective history of oppression. Mm-hmm. But the narrative, the way in which you are interpolated, if it drags you towards immigration or immigrant narrative over here and elsewhere, and within America this happens too, right? They say you got slavery was 400 years ago. You're now citizens. Get to voting or get learn strategies about how you can enter the structure, right? So what I'm saying is they're absolutely the same. Like if a Brazilian Black person, an Afro-Brazilian, who was born in say 1875, for the first 13 years of his life he was a slave. If he were to arrive here in 1950, he'd be now 75. Right? The narrative, he would actually still be around for a new narrative about post-colonial immigration to emerge and wrap them up. Right? But this person, his scene of subjection begins in slavery time period of Brazil. What in America, what you have in the ghettos in America and in the Caribbean and in Latin America, is people who are still confined to the very same areas under different ways of subjecting them to violence, but yet they don't have that narrative that people over here have as post-colonial immigrants. And now I'm not conflicting myself, because people, once the Jamaican cedes to it and says, okay, I understand my lot in this world, in this country, is as an immigrant, they're going to follow the line as an immigrant. They're going to claim and demand rights for immigrants. Whereas the descendant of slaves can still hold on to the Fenonian call to end the world. Right? The immigrant here might not want to end the world, or might not even understand what that means. But the slave has a very visceral idea of what that actually means, because my father, my grandfather, great-grandfather before him, they're all slaves. Right now, I live my slavery differently, but it's the same. Over here, you are given identities to work with, or new subjections to work with.
I think someone in the previous class said, like, making the comparison between the difference between, like, the resistance in America and for Black liberation and why it doesn't exist here, even though, as you said, like, statistics prove that it's pretty fucking shit here. Like, is because it's framed within this context of nationalism. Oh, well, we just needed to be decolonized. It wasn't about white supremacy, it was about nationhood. Yeah. I think that really...
Yeah, so if you arrive here with national pride, that's actually detrimental. I say this as an Eritrean. Okay? An Eritrean nationality is king. It's the way forward. We were under successive regimes of colonialism. At the very end, there was our very neighbors. It was a 30-year war for struggle, and it was completely the line was Marx, Mao, Lenin, with a bit of Fanon. Right? And we got the country back 65,000 markers later. We got the country, a new nation, a country that was never even heard of in the 80s. By 1991, 93, it was now a new nation. But what they missed in Fanon was that, let me read this. Always, no, this is not, but this is, it's inspired by Fanon. Always, as this suggests, reading from the top, yeah? Nationalism arises in one nation's dealings with another rather than in isolation, whether between states or within them, since states and nations are not identical. British state consists of England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Where this relationship is oppressive as in the history of imperialism, the conquering nation will impose its identity as the model of civilization upon another whose own identity is thereby suppressed. In the reverse situation, in moments of national liberation, the colonized nation reasserts its history, language, and customs, and the act of expelling its former rulers. One of the ensuing contradictions is that nationalist struggles are often led by a native bourgeois intelligentsia, formed by the colonial power, which comes to occupy the institutions and the role of the former colonizers. The result is that instead of decolonization, one simply gets old colonial structures in new national terms. It is unlikely, Sarap adds, this is Sarap from 96, that any nationalism can escape the shared paradigm of colonizer-colonized that brought it into being. Now, for the last 100 years, this has been the biggest debating point, right? Nationalism, Fanon said this himself, me calling my people to waken them up and inspire a national consciousness is not the same as nationalism. He kind of split the hairs. But what Fanon really did was warn, and he was alive to see it happen in Kenya, of this very thing. That the people who would end up in power were basically sitting on the seat and in the very institutions and the very way of doing things and knowing things. They would be, the word they use on the streets is sell out, right? I wouldn't say sell out, but they are actually, they don't know how, they find out once they get onto the seat how much wider circumscribed they are by coloniality. If colonialism ends, coloniality doesn't end. Coloniality is not land restricted. That's anti-capitalists have a field day with this because for them the IMF and the World Bank is the very way of maintaining the relationship. I see it as true, but I don't think that is the core point. It's coloniality, the epistemic knowledge structure, and the being, the institutions and the ways of living that were ingrained into the very becoming of them. So that last line is really good. It is unlikely that any nationalism can escape the shared paradigm of colonizer and colonized that brought it into being. You can't make something that they gave you and make it work for you. It does give you national identification, which is good.
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I don't agree that the issue is nationalism. I think no matter how much we want to look at Lenin and all the various different revolutions around the world, before you can liberate your nation, you have to struggle for a national identity, whether it be Russia, whether it be the Soviet Union at the time, whether it be China, whether it be Cuba, wherever you see. The issue is not whether or not you're nationalistic or not, is whether or not your nationalism is framed within an anti-imperialist framework. That's really the issue. All of us will have our nationalism. We will either be progressive or be reactionary or be capitalist or be socialist. But clearly you cannot have a nationalism which is capitalistic, which is going to do nothing but recreate itself in nothing but a neo-colonial state.
Yeah, sure. I get that. What I would say is you cannot have a nationalism that is devoid of the European idea, the framing of it, because the power relation is the same. It hasn't changed. So I'm agreeing with you. I agree with Fanon when he says it's important that we need to instill a national consciousness in the people who have been put aside and trampled upon. But for him, it was a phase. There was a phase after that, which never happened. For him, it wasn't, okay, now we become nationalist, just as nationalistic as whatever nationalists you have in Europe or in the West. For him, that was a phase. And what hurts me, but why I agree with it is, it makes sense that Venezuela can do what it does, having its natural resources, right? Natural resources. And that a place like Eritrea cannot do what it does, in virtue of not having what they have. So the anti-imperialist movement here that's framing it, even not just the imperialist one, but the anti-imperialist movement that is framing it from here, thinks through natural resources. And therefore something like BRICS comes up. So Brazil, China, Venezuela, places like this, they have something to come to the table with. They become kind of the leaders of a globalized, but really just local Leninist framing of things. What I said earlier about the indigenous cosmologies that are being still trampled on, and they don't agree with the idea of national resources. And from an anti-black position, I would say the DRC. There's no reason why the DRC couldn't do what Venezuela is doing. And this is a different side of the argument. The DRC has just as many natural resources, but anti-blackness and the history of slavery, and compounded by colonialism, that has left a completely different situation for sub-Saharan African countries, regardless if they have natural resources or they don't. So I have a problem when racist countries like Brazil, racist countries like Russia, are kind of touted as the people who, I don't know, there's kind of a new global South power based in the kind of natural resource model, right? People who are, there's a term for it, I'm forgetting. And for me, I can't wait as an Eritrean for them to get their shit together. And I don't know if you know the documentary Jamaican Debt in Jamaica. Life and Debt in Jamaica. There's a very interesting moment in the film that nobody talks about. Jamaica. So the film is about how the tourism industry comes to, I'm not going to give you the whole thing, but the documentary shows tourists having fun in Jamaica. While at the same time, the backdrop of the whole documentary is how Jamaica is being bled to death by the IMF and the World Bank. And there's a moment in it when apparently a shipment of chicken arrived to feed the tourists at their resorts, but it was out of date. It was 20 years old or something.
What?
Chicken that was out of date for 20 years.
This is the thing. This Europe sells.
So this is what Europe does, right?
It does it to Africa.
But it ended up in a resort where tourists were having fun and frolicking. And the anti-imperialist speaker at that moment said, you know what they said to us when we complained about? Well, I think the point he was trying to make is we caught them in the act, right? Of fucking us over. But what he said was, when he told them about this, they apologized to them, whoever the corporation was that was sending them the food. They apologized to them, saying, sorry, that shipment was meant for Haiti.
Oh.
Okay. And within an anti-imperialist gathering, that just slides under the table. I cry inside after that. Because Haiti is the fucking beginning.
Yeah.
And this is why I want to end. The Haitian Revolution is the most essential moment of resistance. But I stopped short of calling it agency because of what I said. So we can speak about it. Thanks. If you have questions, discussions.
What text is this?
Oh, this is very helpful. Most of the stuff that I got, we speak about it in my Eritrean brothers. Most of the terms and terminology that I use is from this glossary. It's a cultural studies glossary, cultural theory. It's called A Glossary of Cultural Theory by Peter Brooker.